What it do, it's Drew Blue to give you guys a quick walkthrough when it comes to replacing your strut and shock for both the front and the rear of your 2016 Scion TC, especially if you get the TEIN Coilovers. Part number ending, gonna take a wild guess, QUASA1. That's what I believe that part. I know for a fact it was definitely a 1 at the end. But anyways, for the front, it's pretty easy when it comes to having the right tools. You got the 2 windshield wipers right here. They got a cover here. You just get a flat head, flip it off. 2 14mm bolts, boom, comes off. Then you got the outer cowl cover, 2 plastic fasteners. Get that out. This will come off. Then after that, on the actual cowl panel, you're gonna have the windshield wiper motor right here with 2 10mm bolts. Get that out of the way, as well as a clip with a tab on the top of the white clip. Just press down on the tab, pull out. Then all you gotta do is slide the motor a little bit to the left to get that rubber bushing out of its hold, and then it'll come out. Then you can proceed to take out 9 10mm bolts that holds the cowl panel onto the car. Once you take out those 9, pull out the cowl panel. You have free access to the 3 14mm bolts holding the strut and shock assembly on both sides of the front car. After that, you'll just go ahead and take off the 2 14mm nuts. Boom. The third one, screw it all the way to the top, just enough to where you could get the rest of it out by just turning it with your hand. But you want to still leave it on because you don't want that to completely fall off. Once you free it from all the attachments here on the knuckle and a couple of parts holding to it, you got 2 22mm bolts and nut holding and linking the knuckle with the shock and strut assembly. You just go ahead and get a 22mm wrench to hold on to the nut as you break open the bolt. Once you do, before you pull it all the way out, I should recommend get a jack underneath the lower control arm, and then have the jack kind of jack all the way up to the level where it's touching the control arm, so that way you can give it some kind of like leverage to hold the axle up, because you don't want the axle to fall all the way down and get damaged. After you get those 2 22mm bolts and nut out the way, then you got 2 bolts holding the ABS sensor and the brake line hose in there. For some reason, I had a 12 and a 14 on my car. I've seen other people have 2 12s or 2 14s, so check on that. But they're easy bolts to get out regardless. So then after that, you're gonna move on to the 17mm nut that holds a sway bar link onto the strut and shock assembly. Get a 6mm hex key, as well as your ratcheting wrench, and break that open. And then once you get that nut out, then you can proceed to go back on top, remove the last 14mm bolt with one hand as you use the other hand to hold on to the strut and shock body. And once you have the final nut off, go ahead and carefully get both hands and remove it nice and easy out. Then once you do that, get the new TEIN coilover in here. I'd definitely say sit it on a knuckle, then kind of jack the car up a little higher, because it's going to technically have to sit up a little bit higher with the TEIN coilovers just being a little bit shorter. But regardless, you just want to jack it up to a point where you have a good amount of, like, where you could just have a good little thrust upwards to get one of the studs through the hole. Then you want to get, with the other hand, one of the 14mm nut to screw it on there, just so that way it'll hold the coilover. Then after that, you want to first connect the sway bar link to the TEIN coilover. It's going to have 2 protruding hedges. That's going to make it impossible to get a ratcheting wrench in there, so you're going to need an actual manual metal wrench, one of those things where you turn a bolt and you have to remove it to kind of get it in fitting again to turn it. You're going to have to get one of those and turn the 17mm nut back on, and then of course put a 6mm hex key. For me, I didn't care if I damaged the sway bar link bushing, which to me it wasn't a big deal. What I did was I got a 6mm impact socket, put it on my impact wrench, as I got the 17mm metal wrench on there. Let me show you what it looked like. So the closed end of the wrench to my left is what you're gonna need to get in there. The one that I have on my right, this ratcheting wrench, is too big to fit into that. You won't have enough clearance to get that in there on the 17mm bolt. So you're gonna need this one right here that you see. What I did was I got this closed end on there. I got the impact wrench, and then what I did was to tighten it, I just kind of had the impact wrench go left, so counterclockwise. So I pressed it all the way until the nut kind of got snugged on there, and then continued to tighten it with the wrench right here, all the way to where I couldn't tighten it anymore. Plus I had a Milwaukee impact wrench, so it has a fastener mode to where it'll snug it right before it'll over torque it. So I'm good on that. But after that, that's the one thing that I know I learned that I had to do first. Then after that, you can proceed to go ahead and connect the coilover to the knuckle, get the two 22mm bolts all the way in, then go ahead and screw the nut in. But I will say, before you do, put some blue thread locker on the threads of that bolt, then screw the two nuts in. Then after that, with a 22mm wrench holding on the nut, go ahead and torque the two bolts to 177 foot-pounds. I would say to torque the 17mm nut to 55 foot-pounds, but you could do it by hand. Plus, I don't think it's doable with the torque wrench unless somebody got a better idea on how to do it, because it's just gonna keep spinning with that damn hex key adapter. Which is why, like I said, I just kind of took the risk with the impact wrench. I'm probably gonna get a new sway bar linkage anyways. But after that, you're gonna go ahead and put in the two bolts that hold the ABS sensor and brake hose line. And once you have that, go ahead and jack the car up a little bit to where you can have the full clearance. Well, not jack the car up essentially, but essentially you want to come in here again, push the coil over to where you can get the other two studs in if you haven't done it yet. And once you have the two studs coming through the hole, get two 14mm bolts in there. Just snug it. You don't have to really tighten it crazy yet. Don't torque it, because you want to torque it at the end once you have pressure on the car with the tire back on the hub and the car back on the ground. So you'll save torquing that for last. But like I said, once you just get the two bolts holding the ABS sensor and the brake line hose, which only gets torqued to 14 foot-pounds, so honestly you're just better off just tightening it and you're good to go. Like I said, get the tire on, torque the lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds once it's on the ground. Then you just repeat the process by the opposite. But before you get all the accessories like the cowl panel, the outer cowl cover, and this, that's when, once you have the car down on both tires, go ahead and torque the three 14mm bolts to I believe 77 foot-pounds. Let me double check real quick. No, my apologies, 37 foot-pounds. So once you have the three 14mm nuts torqued to that number, then you can go ahead and get the cowl panel in there, get all the 9-10mm bolts back in the spot. You don't have to worry about torque specs. You just tighten them, snug it, and they're good. Then after that, get the windshield wiper motor back in there. Snug both the two 10mm bolts that hold that motor in, as well as get the clip back. Once you got that in position, make sure it is in position, and then you're going to proceed to get the outer cowl panel back on. Get the two plastic clips in there if you can. If not, you can buy some new ones. They're cheap and easy to replace. Then, of course, you get the windshield wipers back on. It's going to be like a little spline, so you want to make sure you push it all the way down to where it's secure. And then after that, get the two 14mm nuts. Then you're going to torque it to 17 foot-pounds. So with that being said and done, like I said, the front, you only have to watch out about the clearance for the sway bar link and TEIN coilover connection, but we're going to move on to the rear. So for the rear, you want to do the same thing with what you did with the front. After you have the car jacked up and sitting on a jack stand, you just get the jack it up onto the lower control arm, just to where it kind of is like right underneath, and Looks like it's snug onto it, but like I said, you don't want to add pressure on it just yet, because you're gonna have to remove two 10mm bolts that hold the dust cover for the brake rotor and brake pads. After that, you're gonna proceed to remove two 17mm bolt and nut combination holding the rear shock absorber and the rear knuckle onto the rear lower control arm. After, I would recommend taking off the 17mm connecting the lower control arm and the knuckle first, since that bolt for me, just based on history, was just the most difficult for me to remove. So don't do it last, do it first. Then after you got the bolt all the way out extracted, then move on and hit the shock absorber. And then after that, the lower control arm is going to drop a little bit, but that's where the jack comes in handy, because it's going to hold it, so that way you can come over underneath to the rear sway bar link, remove a 14mm bolt all the way out, so that way the lower control arm can drop just low enough for the spring to come out. But like, it won't drop because you got the jack holding onto the lower control arm. So you're going to come over to your jack, and I'm speaking like as if you have a floor jack. You definitely want to use that. But then you're going to start turning it slowly counterclockwise to lower it, and once you do, it's going to release some tension holding the spring. You might hear like a little quick thud. If you do, then you're in the clearance. But for me, for the most part, like after I did it the first time, I don't really have to deal with that anymore, because it slowly kind of releases pressure on its own. But then you want to go ahead and check by kind of like getting a long flathead screwdriver, poke at the spring to see if it's already like wiggling. If it's wiggling, that means there's no pressure holding on it. It's safe for you to go in there and yank it out. But after that, then you can get the TEIN coilover spring in there. But there is a couple edits, like I said, that you have to do. So for example, with the TEIN coilover spring, you keep everything the same with the rubber coverings on the OEM springs. You put the bottom one on the bottom and the top one on the top. What happens is, the way how the spring looks, because the OEM, the smaller looped end is on top and the bigger one is on the bottom. It's the complete opposite with the TEIN spring. The smaller end's going to be on the bottom, and the bigger one's going to have an actual adjuster sitting on top of it with a metal lip. And on top of the metal lip, that's where you sit the top rubber cushion. But on the rubber cushion, you have to cut a portion of it where it kind of like loops around, and it's like there's one part that's thicker on the outside lip of the rubber cushion than the rest of it. So you have to kind of like level it even to get it in there. I used a Milwaukee Fuel multi-tool. I have the M12, and I kind of used the cutter that came with it when you buy the box, or actually the actual tool base, because it comes with like a couple accessories and a sanding paper as well, which is also useful going down the road in a couple of steps. But yeah, you want to use that little cutter and kind of like just jab at it a little bit until it's kind of an even surface, and then you can put it onto the squeeze it onto the metal lip, and have the three, like the little rubber kind of like I want to say fangs, just for the lack of better terms, but you can just flip it, put it in there. Once you do kind of get it in there, to where you can get the jack to just jack it a little bit, at that point, once you know that like it's not going to move out and it's like inside, then you're good to go to installing the bolt all the way through the linkage between the lower control arm and the knuckle. You don't have to tighten anything yet. Just like I said, just get the bolt in there. That will be the biggest headache, I guarantee you that. Just get the bolt in there and you're good to go, because the OEM shock absorber, much like the spring and the front coilovers, is going to be longer than the TEIN coilover, the TEIN shock absorber. And with that, there's also another edit you got to do. So the OEM dust cover that's on the original shock absorber, you're gonna have to take the dust cover off and actually have to cut it. And where you cut it, there's gonna be a number. If you look on the dust cover, it's gonna be a 1 right above the 1, to where you see like a big fat line running around the dust cover. Underneath that big fat line, I like to call it like a stripe. It's gonna be like a dark protruding stripe. You're gonna feel it. It's obvious, but it's like right there above the number 1 on the dust cover. You're gonna cut it right there. What I did was I used a hacksaw with a at first I used the wooden with nails blade, but there's actually where it turns into from being a rubber completely around to where there's actually a metal housing within the rubber coating. So you just kind of like want to get a good portion where you're cutting it. Like if you feel like it's difficult to cut it with the wooden nails blade, switch to the metal blade, and you can. What I'll do is like I did it was I cut a little bit on one side to where I can expose a cut in the flesh of the rubber. Then I kind of like just started like working, getting in half the blade in there and half the blade on the outside, and started kind of like turning the dust cover as I just kept rolling the with one hand as I used the hacksaw to just keep letting the blade cut with the other, just start turning it slowly and slowly until I know I got a full line around the dust cover, and then pretty much it was detached from one another. After that, you're gonna see like a big rubber sticking out. Just grab that rubber, twist and turn it and pull it out. Simple as that, because you have to remove that bumper stop rubber as well. And then once you turn it, you'll see like a complete clean metal housing inside the dust cover. That's when you did it pretty good. You pretty much did what you had to do. But what I did too was, because like it might be a little bit rough on the edges, that dust cover is gonna sit on the Tine rubber, Tine's own version of rubber dust covered. So what I did was I switched the from the cutter tool accessory on the multi-tool to the actual sandpaper accessory. I kind of went and did out of habit. I went from the lowest amount of grit to the highest amount of grit. So what comes with it was like a 60 grit, then I moved to an 80 grit, then 120 grit, and a 240 grit. So what I did was I spent about at least 5 minutes going around the lip on top of the dust cover for the rubber, just to smooth it out, because like I said, it's also like metal on there too, so you want to kind of smooth that out a bit so that way it doesn't poke holes and kind of ruin the rubber dust cover for the shock absorber. After that, I kind of like went through 5 minutes with each grit phase. You don't have to do this necessarily. You could just go straight to the 240. But for me, I just want to get the habit in, so that way when I do paint, I don't skip that meticulous step, man. That's just for me going down the road. But yeah, you can just get the 240 grit, put it on the sandpaper accessory, then just kind of sand it for a good 5 minutes to where at least you feel like it's smooth and there's no sharp edges pointing out. That's all it is. Do it on the top of the lip as well as on the inside corner, and you're good to go. Then you'll be able to put that in there. And once you got, and like the Tine, I would definitely recommend read the Tine instruction sheet for sure. But like it'll show you like the graphics on how you're gonna insert everything onto the rear shock absorber. But essentially, you're just gonna slide in the rubber housing that Tine provides you first. Then you're gonna get the it said to put in a D-ring. I didn't have time to get that. I just put in the washer ring. Then I got the washer on top of that. Then I put the OEM modified dust cover. Then I just slid it in into the hole with one hand, as I got the 17 millimeter nut that came with the shock absorber, just like I did with the front. Just kind of tighten it a little bit to where it actually would hold the shock absorber. Then after that, I moved back down here. Then I got the second 17 millimeter bolt. After I've already got the first bolt going through the knuckle and lower control arm linkage hole, I went and did the same thing for the shock absorber and lower control arm linkage hole. But before I could do that, I had to jack the lower control arm just a little bit higher, so that way I could fit the hole through those two. And once I did, then I put some blue thread locker on the threads of the bolts. Then I got the nut in there. Then after that, got the 17 millimeter wrench on the nut as I torqued the two bolts to, I believe, where's my phone? 66 foot-pounds, if I'm not mistaken. I should have it right on the money. Yep, 66 foot-pounds. Then after that, I proceeded to go underneath to the sway bar link. So there's going to be a rubber bushing that the 14 millimeter nut will stick on. Make sure that the rubber side is actually facing up and that the metal side is facing down, because that's where the 14 millimeter nut is going to sit on. It's going to sit on that metal housing. It's there for that way to prevent metal to metal touching when the suspension goes up and down. But yeah, so you just want to get the nut all the way in there. I kind of use my impact wrench because it is a pretty tough thread for that 14 millimeter nut to go through. Then after that, you just want to torque it to 70 foot-pounds. And I didn't hear a click from me, so I just kept turning and turning until I had a hard time really turning it anymore, and just left it at that. Same thing for both sides. Once you have that done with the two 17 millimeter bolts back in place, with the nut already torqued in and all that, as well as the 14 millimeter nut for the sway bar link, then you can go over and put the dust cover for the brake pads and rotors. Go ahead and put those 10 millimeter bolts in there. You just have to snug it. You don't really have to worry about the torque specs on that. Then after that, get the two tires back on for both sides. You're going to repeat for one side, you're going to do the same thing for the second. And then after you have both shock absorbers and springs installed with the steps that I just provided y'all, and of course the tires on with the lug nuts torqued to 76 foot-pounds, then you want to come over here to the 17 millimeter nut and screw it all the way in. And then after this point, at first it's kind of forgiving with the Allen key on the shock absorber compared to the OEM, but then you want to get a 3 millimeter because it goes from 6 to 3 now. It's a smaller hex hole, so you're gonna get a 3 millimeter hex key in there, which I believe Titan provides you anyways. But then you want to get the ratcheting wrench and just keep tightening it until you can't tighten it anymore, or like you feel like it's really snug on there. And then after that, you're pretty much done. So that's the walkthrough for y'all. But like essentially all you're gonna need is a 10 millimeter 12 millimeter, maybe 14 millimeter, maybe for the 12, but for sure a 14 millimeter, a 17 millimeter, and then a 22 millimeter socket. I definitely would get both short and long for both of them, and then have a 6 millimeter hex key, as well as a 17, 22 millimeter ratcheting wrench, and then a 17 millimeter actual regular manual wrench like this. So both of these on hand, and then blue thread locker. You can buy any brand and you should be good to go. I would definitely, like, for me, I don't really buy Permatex. The one I bought, let me show you. Yeah, this is the brand I bought. It was Vibratight. This is a great thread locker. If you watch Project Farm on YouTube, he always tests different brands for whatever type of product you're buying for. So when he did thread lockers, this was definitely the best one that he rated, and it definitely holds up for me. So you'll definitely love that. I would definitely buy that because I definitely had a couple of bad run-ins with the Permatex brand. Go with that. Once again, it is the Vibratight brand, and unlike how this bottle slipped off my hand, the thread locker gel will definitely do what it's supposed to do for your bolts and keep it tight throughout all kinds of vibration. But yeah, that's it. That concludes this walkthrough. I know it's 24 minutes long, but I had to explain everything a little bit in the best detail I can. So if you have any questions, please, you know what I mean, like, let me know in the comment section. In case you're stuck, don't jump into it. Definitely recommend you watch the video throughout. If you did, great for you, you're good to go. But yeah, then after that, like I said, if you have any questions, leave it in the comment section. I'll definitely respond and give you the best answer I can. And then after that, move on, and best of luck to you. All right, y'all. Stay safe and stay blessed, y'all. Deuces.